Joe, welcome to the podcast.
Casey, great to be here. Appreciate the opportunity to talk with you again.
Well, yeah, we have another retirement coach joining us here on the Retire with Purpose podcast, and I'm excited about it. I've followed you, Joe, for quite some time. I think I originally reached out to you to schedule an interview years ago, and now here we are.
Great to be here. Appreciate it.
Well, I'm excited to get things started because I think you have an interesting story into your journey throughout your working life, but most of all, that transition into retirement, that transition into executive coaching, that transition into retirement coaching, even going back to school when you're 59. I think individuals are going to be interested to learn, what that experience was like. But before we get into your background, there's something that I wanted to kick things off with that I thought might be an interesting conversation right off the top here, and it was regarding a blog post that you had posted fairly recently on the power of letting go of the hero's narrative in retirement and the idea of spending our last part of life serving others. Can you just speak to what you mean about letting go of the hero's narrative?
Sure. So this is something I picked up when I went back to school. And I went back to school because my wife reminds me all the time I have a lot to learn still. But it was a book by Richard Rohr, who's a Franciscan priest in New Mexico. And it's a book called Falling Upward. And he basically talks about the first half of life, we're building our identity, our container, our skill set. But in the second half of life, our priorities change. And as Wayne Dyer once said, it moves from pursuing success to pursuing significance. We really want to make a contribution to others, contribution to the greater good. And it's not necessarily a linear path. There are stumbling stones, as he calls it, along the way. And it's something that we return home again. He talks about in the book about how the hero's journey always goes out, conquers, but then returns home. And that returning home is the second half of life where you really have a chance to focus on your own purpose. I know it's a topic you know a lot about.
And so the hero's narrative is our journey to retirement, as I hear it. And then we step into retirement, and that's our journey back home. And we're supposed to, and do we let go of that hero's narrative? Because I hear a lot of retirees stepping into retirement going, now I get the opportunity to be a hero. Now I can go volunteer. Now I can go do those things that I've always wanted to do and making an impact in the world. I've got a gentleman right now that is now, he retired in his mid 50s, and he is now working as a volunteer, a foreman, if you will, for the one of the local housing groups to build homes and underprivileged homes. That's kind of his hero's journey now.
So I think it's letting go of the focus perhaps on ourselves, on achievement, on success, on building that financial portfolio, those financial resources, and it shifts the focus toward others, toward really what are we really here for? What's that sole purpose that really drives us now? Because it may not be the same thing that drove us in the first half of our lives.
Yeah. And there's something different driving you right now. And it seems to be coaching. And I think for some, this concept of a retirement coach or having an executive coach is a relatively new concept. People have maybe thought of a retirement coach as a financial planner working with them. Maybe they had a business coach while they were working. What exactly is executive coaching and retirement coaching? Do you differentiate the two?
They're definitely related, but different. And to start with my own experience, I had a corporate career for 26 years, one company. And in 2000, I had a coach for a year because in retrospect, that was probably a hard case. It took longer than usual. Usually I work with people for about 6 months or so. And the executive coaching part is really about helping leaders raise their game, be more effective at what they do, often when they're taking on broader responsibilities, increase scope, increase scale, better at their job. And what happened for me is once I got so much out of that experience because I had a tremendous coach and she taught me a lot. I learned a lot. There was a definite difference in my leadership and a ripple effect on the organization I was leading and supporting. But I remember thinking at the time, boy, I did all the work. What did my coach really do? Of course, that's what it's about. The coach really guides, facilitates, runs a process to help you generate insights and then take actions. Retirement coaching for me came about actually after I became an executive coach, which was 11 years ago. I was hired to groom a successor to a CEO at a company. And he decided halfway through, said, this process has been great, but it's taught me one thing. I don't want to be the CEO. I want to retire early at 55 and do something more philanthropic. And that led me to retirement options because I was looking for tools that might help him and others. And then it started to come up more and more. A lot of women in particular that I was coaching for companies asked me, I don't want to really be doing this when I'm in my 50s or 60s. Can you help me figure out how to get on non-profit boards? Because I'd like to be on corporate boards when I'm in my 50s. And so I think a retirement coach is similar in terms of the guiding principles. It's helping someone figure out the new path, but both are future focused. They're really not like a therapist looking backward. They're looking at the future and trying to make sense and clarify what's most important to you now, and then charting a course in a practical sense. How do you get there?
Yeah, I can imagine those two things are fairly symbiotic for you. You have your executives you've been coaching for maybe years that are now ready to transition to retirement. You go, hey, I'm a retirement coach too.
Yes, that definitely happens. I have actually now 3 former clients that I'm working with who are in a transition, so they do come back. But I do both simultaneously. So I have an equal weight of number of clients that I coach in both spheres. Most of the companies that I coach with, I've done business with for almost 10 years in most cases, although I pick up usually a new company or 2 each year. Yeah. And it's a privilege because I get to work with people who are much smarter than me. It's a big universe and it makes my job a lot easier.
Well, you were a human resources dude for many years, and I wonder how that experience in human resources has contributed to your career as a coach.
Well, I think it's about really human potential. That's always what attracted me to HR, even though we're known for saying the word no a lot. But it's really about developing talent, retaining talent, attracting talent to the organization. And then I saw over my career how much I grew and people around me grew. And I think that continues in retirement. That's something people sometimes forget, that we're generally, COVID aside, the impact on longevity, we're living longer. And a lot of times people have been brought up in a way where they think retirement's the end, but it's actually the beginning. Our minds tend to continue to learn. The neuroscientists figured out a decade or so ago about neuroplasticity, which means our brains continue to develop new connections. So lifelong learning is important. There's a lot more to do. And because we're living longer, as you know, on the financial side, people need to fund 20, 25, 30 years in retirement. But what I help people with is how are they going to invest their time? You can help them create more money, more income. Most people can't create more time. I help them figure out what do you do with that most precious asset of all.
Mm-hmm. Well, you said that's the most precious asset of all, time, which I agree. What's more important, investing money or investing time?
I think you need the money first. So what you do in helping people is foundational, it's fundamental. You need that first. We all know that. So it doesn't replace it. What I do is complementary. It's now that you've achieved that financial security, what are you going to do with your freedom? How are you going to leverage it? One of the guests we had in our podcast, Barbara O'Neill, a former Rutgers professor, wrote a book called Flipping Switch. She calculated that there's about 2,500 hours a year that people, when they move into retirement, have free to allocate to different pursuits. And I often talk with clients about that. How are you going to use those hours? What are you going to do with it? How are you going to allocate it? What's most important to you? How is that going to align with your values?
Now, I want to ask what people most often struggle with when it comes to allocating that time. But first, I want to point out something that was in your ebook, which we're going to offer here in just a moment. Your ebook said that the average retiree spends 32 hours a week watching TV. That was an astounding statistic.
It's come up in various sources. The Pew Research Center had a study looking back over the last decade, and not just TV, but screen time. And it's not surprisingly increasing pre-COVID. You can imagine with all the Netflix we all did during COVID, what the stats are now. But it's at the expense of other pursuits that many people will consider to be more meaningful. Reading, social activities, exercise, those are going down, screen time's going up. And I think that's because sometimes people have a tendency to drift, because the great thing about retirement is not having a structure or a schedule. You've got to create your own. And a lot of times people want a break between. You've earned it, you've earned a break. But if it goes too long, vacation is not that exciting or interesting or challenging. And they need to look for ways to find the right amount of challenge in their new life.
Yeah. And that's what I most often hear when I ask someone what they're going to do in retirement. They said, whatever I want to do. Yeah, I'm going to wake up where I want to get up when I want to get up. And I'm going to go to sleep when I want to go to sleep. I'm going to do what I want to do every single day. And I think that speaks to what it says on your website. It mentions that on average, retirees spend 2.5 years deciding what they would like to do next. Is that time frame, that 2.5 years, is that time frame where people are going, I'm going to get up when I want to get up, I'm going to go to sleep when I want to get up? And does something change 2.5 years in, and that's why they come to see you?
Well, actually, that's an average stat. It was developed by my former firm, Merrill Lynch, in conjunction with Age Wave, and it's the average. So there's a range there, as you'd expect. We all know the downside to averages, but it's a good length of time. Bruce Feiler wrote a book last year, Life is in the Transitions. His research showed it's 4.5 years on average for other transitions, all transitions. So big headline is, takes a while. And oftentimes it's because people don't get a running start. They don't do some of the work before they retire. And then you're all of a sudden faced with the vacation part. Sounds good. But you've heard the expression every day is Saturday. Then it becomes every day is Saturday. And what I see when people don't do the preparation ahead of time is they end up walking into all of a sudden these tugs of war going on. They have hopes on one side, things that they really want, but then there's fear on the other side about really drawing them back. They have dreams of things they want to accomplish or things they want to do or ways they want to be in retirement. But then they have really the realities of life that get in the way. And then finally, they have also some things that they are really looking to do with the freedom, but they have obligations that prevent them fully doing that. So there's these battles that they didn't expect. And they're suddenly in the middle of. There's something they want, and there's something pulling in the other direction.
Well, I wonder if it's really that bad of a thing, and maybe it's even a necessity for some to go through that period of time. I asked that, and I might relate that back to someone that's just out of college. They're not sure exactly what they want to do, and they bounce through job to job for the first maybe 5 years of their career before they find the thing they really love. But they had to go through some of those pains in order to really understand themselves and what they were going to enjoy doing. Is it possible that we don't have to go through that? How do we know if we should have this plan beforehand and know exactly what we want to do? And for others go, hey, it's okay. I'm just going to step in and figure it out.
Sure. I think most people do not know what they want to do exactly going in, and that's okay. You have to be comfortable with that. Give yourself time to experiment. But I think where a good retirement coach helps is you can get you there faster than that 2.5 years, that 4.5 years, because it can help focus you on the decision-making in a structured process to help you. So, but I think it's a good point. And really the way I work with clients is they end up experimenting rather than diving into something. Some of the mistakes I've seen people make too early is nature abhors a vacuum. And when you suddenly retire, and oftentimes people do, or almost half retire earlier than planned, often 5 years earlier. And if you're suddenly retired, then all of a sudden, you've got to really sort out, what am I going to do with my time? And people find you. Deliveries. Can you wait for the cable guy? Can you do this? Can you do that? And then can you volunteer here? Can you do this? Can you do that? Your time gets filled pretty quickly, but it's a whole bunch of other people's priorities. And it's not really tied to what you really want to do. And then there's an awkward process of unwinding some of those obligations, except for the cable guy, for those who still get cable. And that becomes difficult for some people to be able to disengage, and it's a whole nother set of transitions. Yeah. So I think what tends to work is people thinking about it early, starting with their values, what's most important to them now, because it could be somewhat different. Back to your first question about the hero's journey and the stumbling stones I mentioned, to what it is now in the future going forward. It could be a slightly different list. Some things may pop up higher. Some things may have been more important while you're raising a family, pursuing a career, that drop down a bit.
So I think what you said earlier, did you say that on average, individuals are going to retire 5 years earlier than planned?
The Employee Benefit Research Institute has a bunch of studies, great research. And one that they come up with every year has consistently found that it's about 48-49% of people retire earlier than they planned, and often up to 5 years ahead. So that's why I always talk to people about part of the value of doing this work, some of this work early, is to make sure you have a plan B, because that's a hard thing to do from a standing start, but it's more common than we often realize. The other thing that they came up with in a recent study, it wasn't about satisfaction in retirement, it was about spending patterns. It was in September, so there's a COVID effect there. What they found is that 76% of people who retired on average 8 years, I'm using averages a lot today, my apologies, only 76% felt that their retirement experience wasn't living up to their expectations. Now, it didn't go into detail on this, didn't say, well, was the expectations, were they too high, or what else is going on there? But it doesn't have to be that way. More than 24% of people should be really enjoying the time that they've worked so hard and sacrificed for to be able to enjoy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when we talk about this plan B, I know what that would be from a financial standpoint. We talk about having a plan B for your retirement. Someone's planning on retiring at 65, but they're 60. Let's put together a plan just in case you go into retirement tomorrow. What does that look like from a non-financial perspective?
Sure, and that's why I think they really go hand in hand, because you definitely have to start with the numbers, but then you get to the emotional part of it. And retirement is one of the 10 most stressful life experiences. It's number 10, so I don't want to exaggerate, but it's in the top 10. And that's because it really hits at a lot of things that are emotional, meaning often for most people, it's the identity. Who am I? Often, especially with men, gets tied to our jobs, what we do. And then all of a sudden that's gone. Who are you now? Who are you going to be? And that's something we work on with people. The other thing about it is that it really disrupts your routine, especially with a long career. You've had work providing structure, routines, the rhythm of your days, rhythm of your weeks, sometimes months, years. And that's suddenly not there anymore. Good part is you got the freedom, you do what you want. Bad thing is you've got to provide that structure. It also hits status really directly, because not only how we think of ourselves in terms of what we do, how others view us can often be tied to what we do as well. And all of a sudden that's shifted. And so a very innocuous question like, so what do you do at a barbecue, becomes an awkward moment that really people feel. They feel the awkwardness in that. And it takes a while to really craft that new identity. You don't want to rush, as I mentioned before. You don't want to jump into things too soon. You want to experiment, you want to test. But you want to have an answer to that that's forward-looking. And I think the ones I see that thrive in retirement have done that work, they've built a new future, and they see themselves that way. The ones who struggle are looking back in the past. I used to be X, I used to be Y. And it's a different experience.
Yeah, this makes me think, on a side note here, of something that came up when I first joined a group called Front Row Dads. It's family men with businesses, not businessmen with families, is the slogan. And then going out and going to the event, I'm meeting a lot of individuals that are entrepreneurs, but you'd ask them what they do, and they would say, I'm a father, I'm a husband, been married for 25 years, and we have 3 kids. And they created a different sense of identity that was before their career. And I think about that in retirement as, if you've already done that, I'm a grandfather, I'm a husband. These are the things that are most important to me. I say that first in that moment. As you transition to retirement, it doesn't have to change a whole lot. That identity is a little bit more static.
You've got that foundation, you've got that base. It's how you see yourself, and now you have more time for those things. So it's a real positive. You mentioned the fatherhood being such a base. I had once, I can remember exactly where I was walking down the street the day after Christmas. I got a call, cell phone, and it was a potential client who ended up working with us, who said, I'm terrified. I just sold my business to my daughter and son-in-law, and I am terrified because I honestly don't know what I want to do. He was 62 at the time. And it was the first time that I had come across fear, which I heard more and more over the last few years with people, particularly men, talking about retirement, that the prospect was terrifying. They really had gone all in on work, even though they had, as you're saying, the parental identity, but they didn't have any outside interests. They'd gone away. They dropped them over time. And I had another client, a Philadelphia area person, who was retiring in 6 months. Same thing, opened up the same conversation with, really afraid of retirement. He actually had been referred by his wife, who listened to our podcast. She called me right after one of our episodes and said, my husband needs you. He just doesn't know it yet. And when we met, we went through this whole thing. And what he was terrified about was being bored. So I've had a dynamic job, been really interested in it, but over time, as the years have gone by, I put my other interests aside and I'm all in on the job, just as my other client had put all in on his entrepreneurial business. And with him, I'm usually future focused, as I mentioned, looking ahead. It didn't work with him. It taught me a lot about myself in coaching, and I had to shift gears because he wasn't kidding. He didn't have any interest outside of work. It was all work. So what I decided to do was, let's go backward. And we went back decade by decade. Because it's like that scene in Jerry Maguire where he said, well, it wasn't always about the money, was it? It wasn't. You weren't always this profession, right? And so as we went back to the decades, teenage years, et cetera, different things started to come back that he was interested in. He started to come alive a little bit. And one by one, he started to bring some of the things back. And being a smart man, he brought back date night first. And that was a big hit. And he started to do some other things, exercise-wise in particular, started with things he used to do. Tai Chi he used to be involved in, so he reignited that. And then he got into some things about helping others. And what he remembered was he really enjoyed reading to their only child when he was younger. And he got involved in a program helping inner city youth learn to read and reading to them. And so he ended up with this portfolio of interests going from no interest at all to a bunch of things. He's a big reader, went back to really reading classic literature, going back to the library on a regular basis, which was within walking distance. But he built his own new routine. But it always strikes me when people are afraid of retirement, because it should be the other way around. You should be really looking forward to it, embracing it, and using those 2,500 hours a year in different ways that you want to.
How is that individual going to use what he was so good at, right? You've got someone that is incredibly gifted in business. How were those strengths in this instance leveraged in this second act?
So he actually was, I work with three groups of people, for just real quickly, and I'll get into that. The first is people who are focused on the transition. He was in that category. He knew he was done. Most of the people I work with are retiring, but not done yet. He was done. He wanted to just go off and enjoy more time with his wife and son. And that's why getting his structure and interest was so important to him. Second group of people I work with are really interested in upgrading their retirement. They're already retired and they want to come back and do something because it wasn't what they thought it was going to be. They're in that 76% where it didn't live up to expectations. But the biggest group I work with is people who really want to design their life going forward. So to answer your question with him, he was interested in just how am I going to spend my time? I don't want it to be work related. He ended up doing some things, volunteering on political campaigns and redirecting his expertise to some local organizations where he could offer professional help, on more of a pro bono basis, unpaid basis. But many people, that's the most common thing that I work with people on, is how do I redirect my skill set and expertise in new ways? That's the number one thing: consulting, part-time, etc. The second most common is service, something they want to do for the greater good. Could be volunteering, could be social entrepreneurship, something in that regard. That's the second most common. Third is teaching. The stream. I always wanted to be a teacher or a coach. One of my neighbors did this, not a client. He was a lacrosse player in college, a goalie, so he's used to having lots of things coming at him all the time. And he was an engineer, so a very good planner. And he ended up coaching his daughters in lacrosse, getting involved in the travel teams, and then ended up being assistant coach, particularly focused on recruiting locally at one of the colleges. And that led to his post-retirement future, which is actually really being a college lacrosse coach. So teaching in different forms comes up a lot. Next area is creative pursuits. People want to write the book like you did and take time to do that, or art school. In fact, people go back to art school. I had one person who was interested in cooking more, ended up going back to culinary school, not for professional use, but really just to really get serious about it. And the other thing that comes up is entrepreneurship. Not as common, but there are some people who said, I always wanted to run my own thing. I want to start my own business. And what they face is how much they want to put into that, not only financially to make sure it's boxed, but also in terms of their time. Because most of the people that I work with come out with a portfolio of activities, work still being in the mix for many of them, but also things they want to do for service, things they want to do for fun. And so they have those three buckets that they toggle back and forth. And then there's the last category, which I did not know until I started writing a book existed there's, in terms of research. And that's something called serious leisure, which I couldn't believe the body of research on this. And these are things that are basically range from athletics to hobbies, you name it, where people go deep and pursue mastery in that. But what they get from it is a surprise benefit of connections and social interaction with like-minded people. But they're like really serious about it, and it becomes something that they really love to spend their time on. So I see a lot of that. And then people who just want to get back in shape and really take better care of their health runs throughout all this.
We believe that we have a massive opportunity today with the largest generation in history stepping into retirement if we change the definition of retirement and change it to impact. This generation has so much experience, so much education, so much knowledge, wealth, time, where they can go back out and use those talents, those strengths that they had during their working career, during those years in their life where they didn't have the time. They can now leverage those things to change the direction of the world, to make a bigger impact today. I want to revisit something that you had said earlier about this being the 10th most stressful experience or transition in life. I don't know what the other...
Podcasting.
What's that?
Number 11 is podcasting.
Number 11 is podcasting. Well, I'm wondering, I don't know what the top 9 are, but I feel like you probably have a good idea of what a few of those other items are. Do you see that these stressful things in life, they have something in common? Do they have something in common, those other 9, with number 10?
Yes, and that's change. We as humans really don't like change, and they all involve some type of change, often that's imposed, unexpected events, things like death of a spouse, divorce, even marriage is on there, pretty close. So things like that, which is expected, obviously. So it's about something changing, and then all the ripple effects from that event or shift that you have to make. We don't like that. We prefer the status quo. That's one of the tensions we see. It's safe, it's familiar. We can go on autopilot a little bit, and change takes us out of our comfort zone, and it leads to growth. But back to your earlier point about the value of coming out of college and not knowing what you want to do next, very similar. There's definitely usually a reward at the end of those struggles, not always, but often. And it's really embracing change and getting good at making those shifts, making those changes.
I wanted to ask this question, since you said you had a coach, you had an executive coach, it sounds like, at one point for a year. Do you still have a coach today? Do you work with a coach?
I do. I had a coach for a year. Terrific. As you can tell from my bio, I'm really serious about the lifelong learning piece. Very passionate about that. So I continue on. I'm still in a program that's run by David Peterson, who used to run leadership development at Google. He's a phenomenal coach, and he has a program, I think I'm in my second year. You go through different levels of it, where it's literally every week. And it is, the structure of it is, first week of the month is a block on learning what's going on in the world of coaching, the world of business. The second week is coaching demos, where you see really some of the best people in the world do this. And then the third week is groups of the coaches who participate, really practicing new techniques and getting critiqued, all on Zoom. And so we go through that drill with different skills and things on. So these are for experienced coaches. The one I'm in now is for the top 20% of people going through the first two versions of it. So you get selected for that, which I was privileged to be part of. And I just think that continuous learning is so important. So I get coaching through that way. And I also have other relationships. I don't have a paid coach I'm working with currently, but I did a couple of years ago. Still have that more on the business side.
I'm a huge believer in coaches. I have more than one myself, and I continue to do that year after year. I feel like I'm adding a coach almost every year, and that's how I get better. Yeah. What would you say to someone who says, "Boy, this thing Joe's doing sounds pretty interesting"? Retirement coach. I've got some experience in transitioning retirement. It struggles. What would you say to someone that's entertaining this as a second act?
So I think it's a great field to work in. I think that, again, the demographics are very clear. And I think people are coming out of companies obviously far earlier, so they have longer to live, more to give. And so there's a great wealth of people to do that. I think the challenges can be people don't understand what it is, because it's one of those terms you hear. So why would I need that? How hard could that be? But as you get into it, you see, no, actually you do. If you want to play golf 5 days a week and travel, you don't need me or people like me. But the thing I would say to people considering it is make sure you're trained, get certifications, but go beyond that. Meaning, there are people who have figured out that there's more money in training retirement coaches than there actually is in doing retirement coaching. So that's I'm a little outspoken on this. And I think they sometimes take well-meaning people, not retirement options, but I know you Joe Allen Waldman, that's one I went through. She was great trainer. But there are others in the field who I think sell the certification. There's training behind it. Based on the coach training I've seen, I think it's a little light. So I think invest in training first as a coach, then a retirement coach, because I think you need the fundamentals. It's like any sport or any part of business. You want the strong foundation and then add a specialty as opposed to going right into specialty, in my opinion. But it is a good field. There's, again, I work with fascinating people. I'm inspired by my clients. I have a range of ages now. Looking at the people I'm working with today, the youngest is 48, the oldest is 75, and everything in between. And I've got two 75-year-olds, and they inspire me because they said, I have so much more I want to do over the next 5 to 10 years. I need help in figuring out which path I should follow. And there's just so much inspiration just from working with people. So it's a great thing to do. But you want to invest in your own training so you're adding value. And experience, your own experience is important, but it's more about the techniques, the approaches, and make sure that they're solidly grounded.
I really enjoyed what you said, that they've found out that there's more money in coaching and creating certifications than actually being a coach, because it's the same thing in the financial advice industry. There was recently a financial planning article in Financial Planning magazine that I actually it landed on my desk today. And I just couldn't wait to open it because it had all these crazy designations on the front of it. And it turns out there's 212 different designations or certifications that you could have today in the financial advice industry. And there's only a handful of them that actually mean anything. There's only a handful of them that really were designed to create meaningful education. There's a whole credentialing industry that's popped up, not to just make money, of course, but to also create artificial credibility for individuals that are in the financial advice field. So when we look at your designations, certified executive and organizational coach, designing your life certified coach, retirement options certified coach, what do all these certifications mean? And are there specific certifications out there that mean more than others? What are the ones that people should look for? Not if they're going to get certified necessarily, but more so if someone's looking for a retirement coach, how do they know if the person actually has what it takes to do a great job?
Sure. So I'll probably get hate emails from people in the industry when I go through this this list, but here goes. So I think it's important that the coach you're looking to hire has training in a particular approach. So I always encourage people to ask the question, what's your retirement coaching approach based on? Because I think you learn that the training I've been through is as much focused on doing and learning from experience and reflecting on experience and tweaking things than it is academics. I've got the academics too, but it's really about the doing where you learn the most. So my executive coach training was in a university setting. It was a year-long program, very intensive and very hands-on, very practical. And that was really instrumental because you get videotapes, you get critiques, same thing. It's like, looking at the tape in sports and rewinding it and saying, why'd you do that? What were you thinking when you went here versus here? But you come up with a framework and you come up with an approach. In my case, that approach is based on the principles of adult learning, how we learn as adults, and that's from experience and reflection and getting that learning through that cycle. So that's what that's based on. Designing Your Life is a brilliant approach developed by two Stanford professors, Dave Evans and Bill Burnett. Burnett runs the design school at Stanford University, and they take the principles of design thinking and apply them to career and life planning, not retirement specifically. I'm one of the few that doesn't retirement, but it really uses a three-phase process of reflection, what's important to you, what energizes you, ideation, that's a creative part. What could the possible paths be that you would pursue? and what are the pros and cons of each. And then finally, prototyping, as you would with a computer product or a new physical product. Taking those ideas you have out on the road to people who are doing those things today and reality test them. So a lot of times in retirement coaching, there's a lot of talk about dreams. What are you dreaming about? What do you really want to do? That's great. But then they stay there, not really test it, where you learn a lot more. And so I use that approach, or about 60% of the time in my retirement coaching, because it really is very solid, and I'm privileged to be able to be trained by the two professors. They have a book that they came out with in 2016, Designing Your Life, which lays out the process. It's a great one. And then let's see, I'm also certified in another technique with another Stanford professor, BJ Fogg, Tiny Habits. Great book. New York Times bestseller, 2019. And that gets at how you change. And I started using his method in 2014. I was a marathon runner before I got injured. I'm still a runner on a machine. But I came across his method and I said, boy, I'm doing great running, but I haven't done things like sit-ups. So I started with one and got up to 200 a day. A few years ago, I came across, again, an article that said, if you're over 40, which I am, and you are a man, which I am, you can really benefit by, if you can do 40 push-ups a day in under a minute, it'll help your cardiovascular health. So, all right, I'm interested, use it again. Started with one, I do 50 a day now without thinking. So his method takes, what do you want to do, breaking it down to its smallest variation, bolting it onto something you automatically do, and then celebrating it to wire into your brain that you really want to do more of this. And it grows gradually. So that I add into the mix, because when I work with people in that retirement context, it's what do you want to do, and then how do you start? So it helps them start small and build those things in. And I've done that with some couples from time to time where they want to work on things together, which is pretty interesting.
It reminds me of Darren Hardy and his book, The Compound Effect. One little thing at a time, compounding on one another. That's one of my favorite books. I've probably read that one more than anything else. This kind of brings us to a question that we had from one of our fans that was submitted via email. So if you subscribe to our weekend reading email that goes out every Friday, you can do that at retirewithpurpose.com. Then you get invited to ask questions of our guests ahead of time. And Ron asked, what criteria should we use to determine if a retirement coach is a good fit? Also, what is a reasonable amount to pay for coaching? And I would break that down to even looking for specific certifications when we're talking about criteria. And I don't know if that exists in your industry, but if I am looking for someone that knows how to create a retirement income plan, I want a retirement income certified professional. If I'm looking for someone that's going to do estate planning, I'll look for someone that's a CLU. If I'm looking for someone that's really good at tax advice, maybe I'll go to a CPA, someone that manages portfolios, CFA, so on and so forth. There are some of those specific designations depending on your unique circumstances. I don't know if that would be one of those elements of criteria that Ron might use to determine what retirement coach would be right for him.
Sure. So Ron, great question, because I think it's an important decision. You want to talk to a number of retirement coaches. I'd recommend 2 or 3, so you get a sense. A lot of people will talk about the chemistry has to be right. There's going to be a fit. I've got to really click with the person. I think that's important. It's necessary, but not sufficient. You want the chemistry, but that's not enough. A lot of people stop there. And I just remind people, you're not hiring a friend. You're hiring a coach with skills. So if your car breaks down on the highway, you need a mechanic, but you might need a mechanic that really specializes in your particular kind of car. So look for what background did they have before they got into coaching? Is it relevant to you? Could that add something? And then the certification, there's a certified retirement coach to retirement options. I know you've had Joanne Waldman on your podcast before. I went through that training. That was very good. But it wasn't really the coach training, it was to use the assessments. I use those assessments, retirement success profile, life options profile as well. They're very good, very solid, research-based. But so you want to look beyond that in terms of what coach training do they have in addition to a certification, because certification in retirement teaches you some things, but not others, as I mentioned before. So you want to talk about what types of clients have they worked with before, what are some of their success stories, what are some of the challenges, what's their approach based on. Those are the big ones, I would say. And then in terms of the cost, it's actually really inexpensive. The executive coaching, by the way, is not, because the companies are paying, so that's a different scale. But on the individual coaching, retirement coaching, it's very affordable. I hesitate to quote rates specifically because I don't have a full handle these days on exactly the range. However, I would look for coaches who are not trying to sell you a long-term commitment. That's I, for example, just give people a pay-as-you-go. I'm not going to get you to commit to 6 months or a year. I'm going to get you to commit to one session and then you continue. And I work with people most often for about 6 months, but I have 2 clients that were coming up on month 10 because it's useful to them. So I'd look for, what are you really signing up for, drill into that and challenge the coach saying, can we do pay as you go? Because I think that really gives both of you flexibility. And most people continue, but if it's not working, I don't think it's good for either party. It's good to check references. Just say, can I talk to a client or two that has worked with you before to get a sense and really get a sense of it. But get a sense of their process, I would say most of all. How are we going to accomplish this? And what's that based on? That's, I think, the important thing.
Mm-hmm. And for someone that's looking to start going down this path, I mean, how early should they secure a retirement coach? You mentioned, I mean, there's a lot of individuals that get sucked into retirement 5 years earlier than planned. And so how early when do we do this?
So most of the people that I work with are a year to 6 months in that range. I do have a number of people now that are 2 years out. The earliest I've had is 5 years out. I think if you're working with a coach who can modularize it, meaning you could start and then stop and come back later, which I've done with some people, that can be helpful. If you're starting early, you can start doing reading as your weekly email is helpful. Start reading about the non-financial side of retirement so you kind of hit the ground running a little bit. But I think the year is a year out is a must. A little earlier if you're really not sure about what you want to do next. Year and a half or so, I think can really work well.
Yeah, I know from a financial perspective, it should be as soon as possible.
Yes.
To make sure you're staying on the right path. And I would think even from a coaching perspective, you could get a coach 10 years early and at least get a handle, do that one meeting. If we're doing the pay on the go, okay, well, they gave me some good things to think about over the next 10 years. Maybe you're not going to meet with them for the next 10 years, but that could get the thought engine started, I would think.
Yes. And the designing your life approach I mentioned that I use, I take people in really 6 to 12 sessions through the process to the point where they've really done the experimenting and they're immersed in that. They usually go off on their own at that point. Some come back later if they need more fine tuning or help, but that's back to that shortening that 2.5 or 4.5 year average. You can really condense it. It is work, more on your part than my part. Certainly both of our parts, but it's going to be the thinking you're going to do, the experimenting you're going to do. So you want to have enough time to do that where you don't feel rushed. You've got time to do it at your own pace and time to fit it into your life and work.
Let's skip down to an article that you wrote for Forbes titled Unretirement, or it was an article that you discussed in Forbes Unretirement, this concept. What is unretirement and why is it becoming so popular?
So surprisingly, or at least it was a surprise to me when I discovered this, about 25% of people in the US and UK, according to a couple of studies, unretire within the first 5 years. And I mentioned I have some clients who come to me 3-4 years out and say, I really don't know if this is what I expected. And I have one just real quick story if I could, then I'll get back to your question. A gentleman who called me one day, also these phone calls, I was running between meetings and I looked down and that moment in your cell phone when you see unknown caller, and I said, should I take this call or should I go on to my next meeting? I took the call, and it was a person on the West Coast who had sold his business 4 years before, done very well. He said, you know what? 2 words I never forgot, something's missing. And what he said was, I don't want to go back to work, but I wouldn't mind if something different than what I'm doing today. He said, I don't want to dive back onto the merry-go-round, but I'd love to hear the circus music play every once in a while. And so he was looking for that way back in. So he ended up doing something which was a combination of things, philanthropic, board seats, and some consulting. But what drives people back is actually not the financial side, most commonly. It's about, offhand, I think 70% non-financial, because of the things we get from work beyond the paycheck. The camaraderie, social connections, the identity, the purpose, status, those types of things. And they're missed when they're not there. You take them for granted while you're working, but you take them away, all of a sudden it creates a void. So people really want to get back into something that has that connectivity. And often it's getting back, not just in the same work, but something that has more meaning.
One of our fans, Ken, had asked what careers show a larger percentage of unretirees than others. Do you see any trends there? I feel like you see a lot of, I would think it would be entrepreneurs would just be the number one category on that list.
I haven't seen, now I have to think about in my work, I don't see any trends because it's so individual. I don't recall the research on it. One of the people, Nicole Maestas at Harvard, has done a lot of the research on this on retirement with the Rand Corporation. But I'll follow up and see. What I see is professional doctors, lawyers, entrepreneurs, people like that who are just all about their work. They sometimes drift back in a way, and that's why I think the thinking ahead to repurpose. How do you redirect your skill set? How do you repurpose it to a way you want to do it is so important.
Sure. Well, Joe, as we come to a close here, I wanted to talk about your ebook because we're going to be offering that free in just a moment to our listeners. It is titled 7 Traps in Planning for Life in Retirement and How You Can Avoid Them. How do you define trap?
So I see a lot of traps. Some are in the ebook, some are not. That I notice. One of them is the assuming that retirement is vacation. And not factoring in that a 20-year vacation can actually be pretty boring. So, and thinking about retirement equals just relaxation. When I see a lot that people want some more challenge, they don't want to be overwhelmed. They don't want to.
Joe? Is this the lazy river analogy?
Yes. Yes.
Can you include that one?
Sure. So we have a place near us that we used to take our kids to when they were younger, lazy river, and you just go on for an afternoon and you're just drifting along. And I think that seems appealing when you're commuting, working in meetings, dealing with your boss. Just relaxing sounds great. But after a couple of times around the lazy river, you really want to get off. Our kids didn't, but we did. And I think this is the same things here. You want some degree of challenge, something that you're in control of, but you're trying to get someplace, some kind of goals. People say goals. Why do I not need goals in retirement? That sounds like some kind of oxymoron. But you really do want something you're pursuing, something you're striving for, something you're mastering, something you're tinkering with, something you're getting. And in particular, the most powerful is something new that you're undertaking, something new you're learning or taking up for the first time can really add a lot of.
So is that the most powerful type of goal, is doing something new?
Something new or something with purpose. You write a lot about purpose. And one of the things that I find that people don't know about purpose in retirement is the connection with health. There were 2 University of Michigan studies, one in 2019, one just in April 2021. The first one found that people who did not have a strong life purpose, this is like 7,000 people in the study, died, were twice as likely to die. The second one, more optimistically, is about exercise, a new one, 2021 April. And it really looked at same about 5,000 people. And those who, it's kind of a bilateral relationship, those who have a high degree of exercise have a high sense of purpose. Chicken and egg, you don't know which one's driving the other, but they're associated, not necessarily causal, but it's theorized that it also helps with that structure. If you're pursuing exercise on a regular basis, you tend to have to structure your day to include that in there. So that's another way to think of purpose. I also find that the clients I work with, purpose sounds overwhelming. I just retired, now I got to find a new purpose. How do I do that? I find that my clients end up with a multi-purpose retirement. They have some experiments, and over time, one starts to emerge by trying.
Is that your retirement rehearsal concept, or is that along those lines? What is the retirement rehearsal concept?
It becomes part of it, where you really start to do some things before you dive in. And because you don't really know what they're like until you're behind the curtain or involved. Volunteering is a good example, where people say, boy, I thought the mission was so powerful. But then they didn't realize the organization behind it has as many politics, if not more, than the company they just retired from. And that isn't what they had in mind. So really experimenting, testing, and then letting things grow can be really helpful. And again, if you want a running start, thinking about it a little bit ahead of time can position you well.
That's great. Yeah, number 6 on the list was not aligning with your spouse or partner as one of the traps in planning for life and retirement. What are some exercises to ensure that you are on the same page? And once we've done that exercise, what are some things that we can do to get aligned?
Sure. So the basic one is really just start to talk about the topic, meaning, what are your hopes? What are your concerns? Those two buckets could be really useful, because that can start to educate each other about what you have in mind, because you may be at a different place. One spouse might be saying, look, I want to dial it back a little bit or shift gears. Another might be saying, I just said, I'm ready to now step out and really achieve and pursue things. And knowing that's important. Start talking about where you think you want to live. Some of those tangible things. The retirement options assessment, retirement success profile that Joanne Waldman mentioned on your podcast is a good one to take separately. I always recommend people take it by yourself and then compare notes, because that can tell you how prepared you are against different dimensions of retirement, particularly non-financially. But I think the conversation is important because it's something people tend to avoid. And if you can just start the discussion, especially spinning it forward, in 5 years, in 3 years, 10 years, where do we think we want to be? What do you think we might be doing? What's a perfect day? What would a perfect day be like? What would you have done? What would a perfect week have been like? What would we have done? And what would we have done together? And what would we have done separately? Because sometimes people think we have to do everything together. And as someone who's been privileged to be married for 40 years in a row, you need both. You need things you do together, but you need things separate just as well. And so factoring that in can be really helpful.
What do you find to be the most common misalignment?
The most common misalignment is around the purpose factor. What are the things that are going to drive us? Because one or both are now saying, it used to be my career, or it used to be raising our children. Again, one or both could have primary focus. And now I've got to replace that. And there are expectations that one spouse may have for another about how to do that may not really align with what they really want to do, because they may not fully know yet. And so, having constructive kind of brainstorming kind of conversations about that can help about what's possible, with the ground rule of no judgment. Very important. We're just talking about these as just ideas. Let's experiment with these and see where things can bring you there. Because if you're open-minded and you set that tone, you can really open your mind to other things that weren't top of mind for you. I always have learned the hard way to listen to my spouse. I knew when I met her, she was much smarter than me, and it's been proven ever since.
Well, Joe, I was curious, after 40 years of marriage, transitioning into retirement, you were 52, were there any misalignments that you had to manage?
I think there were more on my side. I remember when I first was home, I hadn't been home in 30 years, in the office every day. And back then, so that's 11 years ago, wasn't as cell phone driven as we are today. And we had a landline. I picked up the phone because it was ringing constantly. And people would say, what are you doing there? And I had to tell the story over and over again. So it took me about a month before I got an outside office, which I still have all these years later. This is not it. I'm working from home during COVID. But I think the other part is how the responsibilities shift as you move from a demanding career to more flexibility. How are you going to spend that time family-wise, helping with things? The roles and responsibilities can shift a little bit too. So having an open dialogue about that's really, really important.
Well, Joe, you had one second act. So you transitioned into a second act from human resources to coaching. Is there going to be a third act for Joe?
I like the combination of the executive coaching, where I still keep my one foot in the business side, and I do most of that coaching in person, and the retirement coaching, which is really helping people achieve their dreams and sort out with some clarity where they want to go. It's a great combination. So I want to continue to do that. I have started to write more. I've just finished a manuscript, going through the editing process on a book about the oppositional forces people find themselves in retirement, the battles. We've got a series of 9 of them that I've seen in my clients, and I take one hypothetical client and put him through all 9. And the story ends with him leading a life of purpose. But that's the final challenge, is sorting out the purpose thing. So I enjoy the writing and I enjoy talking about it, but most of all, I want to continue to work as long as I can, helping people on the coaching side. I'm one of these. I don't think I'll ever retire. Ironically, I like this work.
Mhm. Yeah, and along those lines, you don't have to get into this if you don't want to, if it's too personal, but do you work with a financial advisor?
Yes, so I've worked at Merrill Lynch for 26 years. So, and most of the people that I work with have financial advisors too, although occasionally they're not satisfied with them. I think the most satisfied ones are working with CFPs. But yes, you have to have the financial side down pat first, I think, before looking at something.
Did your strategy change? Is it unique or different due to you still working and creating income in this second act? And it doesn't have to be specific.
No, I'm just have to think about it. No, because a lot of mine was deferred comp from my corporate career that was spread out over a long period of time, still to go. So it was built a lot around that, and built around probably, if I'm healthy enough, retiring at 70, retiring age 70 for Social Security, deferring that until that time. So,
and you wanted to ensure that everyone always has a plan B. You want to work forever. You want to do this forever. You never want to retire. So what's Joe's plan B?
So my plan B is really to be able to do more or less of it depending on what else I want to do. I mean, that's what's good about owning your own businesses. I can go all out. I can dial it back. I can really determine how much I want to work, how much effort I want to put into it. Right now, I'm all in. I've been that way since I graduated college. But at some point in the future, it may be time to toggle it back a little bit from time to time.
Yeah, there was a previous guest, Dr. George Schofield, that came on and said, you never want to let your ponies turn into Clydesdales. And I think as many go down this path, they get into a second business or a new type of work. They start a new business in retirement. Yeah, as you have here, it can become that Clydesdale. It sounds like you feel like you've got a lot of control over this, where you know it's not going to get out of hand. Do you use any strategies or techniques or thought processes to check yourself and make sure you're not getting things too dialed up?
Yes, a number of things, but the most important one I picked up 15 years ago and used it every week, almost without fail since, and that's David Allen's Getting Things Done. And he has a process, part of his system, called a weekly review. And it's really setting up a meeting with yourself. And I do that every week. When I was working, I did it on Friday afternoons, and now I do it on Sundays, right before Zoom mass. So I block off the hour and get it done. We're really just looking at what's going on, work and life from a 30,000 foot view, and then down to the ground to really have a check. And so I look at my client list, I look at the week ahead, look at the month ahead, look at the week back, commitments, follow-up, et cetera, manage all those things. And the other one I used for even longer, Stephen Covey's concept from 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which I've found transformational for me. It's a concept called big rocks, that you really want to have the commitments, put the big rocks in a jar first, and you can fit in all the pebbles, as opposed to the opposite. If you try to, if you put the sand in first, the little things, you can't fit the big rocks, your priorities, into the jar. So I always really have an idea, what are the big rocks? What are my commitments personally and professionally? Make sure they're knocked down so I can organize around those. And that leaves time for my hobbies and things I like to do, continuing to try to run. Because I had set a goal. My goal coming out of retirement was I always wanted to qualify for my hometown Boston Marathon. And I did it. I trained while working, but I could never quite get it right, but I knew I had the ability to do it. And so I finally did. It took me 12 races. And that was a big one because I had the time to dedicate to the right type of training. And I hired a coach at the end. I got my time down. I was close, 6 minutes away. And I said, I don't know if I can get it down further. So I hired a coach. And so I ended up beating the qualifying time by 5 minutes. Postscript, I ended up half mile to go and broke my left hip, stress fracture. Ended up in hospital for a week, 7 months of physical therapy, 3 days a week. But I'm very lucky. I had a great surgeon. I can now run on a machine. I don't run outdoors anymore. But I was able to dedicate the time to it and still run today.
Well, Joe, I know as we come to a close here, there's a lot of individuals that are listening going, man, I really like this guy. I want to learn more about him. If you want to learn more about Joe, we'll have a link back to his site, his page in the show notes. You can check it out at retirewithpurpose.com. Just go to the show notes. All the links back to Joe will be right there. You can hire him, you can learn more, and maybe it's a good start just to grab a copy of his ebook. And Joe has so graciously provided us with those copies free of charge to you. All you have to do is this: go on over to retirewithpurpose.com and leave a review on iTunes. There's a link right there to leave a review on iTunes for the podcast, or you can do it right inside your podcast app. Just leave an honest rating and review of the podcast, and then shoot us an email at info@howardbailey.com with your iTunes username. We can verify it from there, and then we can send you a link of Joe's ebook out to you directly. It is titled, again, 7 Traps in Planning for Life and Retirement and How You Can Avoid Them. I truly enjoyed it. Joe, thank you for living this second act and providing so much value to all the others that are going through the same thing.
And Casey, thanks for everything you do. You really are shining a light on the importance of purpose, and that's greatly appreciated. It helps a lot of people.
Well, until next time, thanks, Joe.
Thanks.